Do you know that God sometimes hides His greatest blessings in things that the world considers worthless? Today I am going to tell you the story of an old man who bought a blind goat, and that worthless goat changed his entire life. But the most astonishing part of this story is not that he found a treasure. The most astonishing part is that the treasure was searching for him, not the other way around. Listen to this story till the very end, because at the end there is a lesson that may perhaps change your life too. This is a story from a time long past. In a small village there lived an old man. He was well past the age of 60, yet his troubles were older still. The shadow of his wife had long since departed from over his head. His son had gone to the city and never once looked back. His home, if it could be called that, was half on the verge of collapse, its roof leaking in the rain and its walls trembling in the cold. His livelihood was barely enough to survive. One day tea, one day bread, and many days nothing at all. He kept a small piece of land at the edge of the village. Each morning he would rise before dawn, go to his field, work through the day, and return exhausted at dusk. But that year, fate turned its back on him entirely. The rains did not come. The crop burned under the merciless sun. The well dried up. Whatever little hope remained was swallowed by the dry and cracked earth. One morning he sat beside the dried-up well with his face buried in his knees. He sat there for a long time, staring into the darkness of the empty well. Then he rose, lifted his eyes toward the sky, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "O God, I ask for nothing. Only tell me how much longer this life is to be endured." That very same day an old man entered the village beating a drum. In his hand was a rope, and tied to that rope was a blind goat. The man called out in a loud voice, "Take the blind goat, take the useless goat. Whoever buys it is blind himself. Take it cheap, take it cheap." People laughed. Children ran away. Shopkeepers turned their faces and walked on. No one came near, for everyone knew that a blind goat was of no use to anyone. But he stood still. He looked toward the goat. The goat could not see, yet it could feel. It stood quietly in its place, neither running this way nor that, as though it were waiting for someone. He slowly extended his hand and placed it gently on the goat's neck. The goat immediately turned its face toward him, as though it somehow knew that this hand would not cause it harm. His heart filled with emotion. He reached into his pocket, took out whatever coins he had, handed them to the man, and took hold of the goat's rope. The big trader standing in the market watched this scene and burst into laughter. One fat merchant called out loudly, "Look, the blind man has bought the blind one." Another said, "Now the two of them can search for the way home together." A third said, "The old man has truly lost his mind." Laughter rose from all around, and the words pierced his heart like arrows. Yet Old Man said not a single word. He looked at those men, then turned his gaze away, and quietly walked out of the market with the goat. He knew that a poor man gains nothing by answering, for people do not listen to answers, they only continue to laugh. On the way back, something strange occurred. Whenever he tried to lead the goat toward his home, the goat would freeze like a stone and refuse to move an inch. No matter how much he pulled, pushed, or scolded, nothing worked. The moment he loosened the rope, the goat would immediately begin moving toward a different path entirely. An old, deserted, and narrow path that wound behind the village toward the forest and the mountains beyond. His feet came to a halt. That path had been closed since childhood. The old men of the village would say that no one had ever gone down that path. Those who went never returned. There were snakes, there were wild beasts, and there were darknesses from which there was no escape. Old Man struggled for a long time to hold the goat back, but the goat would not stop. Eventually his strength gave way. With a tired and heavy heart he loosened the rope and said within himself, "Whatever God wills, so shall it be." The goat set off down that deserted path, fearful and uneasy, had no choice but to follow. The path was treacherous. There were thorns, sharp stones, and towering rocks. His worn-out shoes scraped against the stones, and pain began to shoot through his feet. Thorns caught on his clothes and scraped his skin, leaving long, thin marks. The darkness was growing deeper with every passing moment. All around there was only silence, the kind of silence that unsettles the soul. Many times he felt the urge to turn back, but when he looked behind him, the path had already been swallowed by darkness. There was no choice but to press forward. At one point his foot landed on a slippery stone, and he fell hard to the ground. A sharp rock drove itself into the sole of his foot. A cry of pain escaped his lips and echoed through the empty valley. He sat on the ground clutching his bleeding foot. Warm tears ran down his face. He looked up toward the sky and wept. In that moment he felt that he had made a terrible mistake. He had spent all he had on a blind goat, and now here he was, alone, perhaps dying. No one knew where he was. No one would come looking for him. But the goat quietly came closer. It breathed its warm breath onto his face. Then it looked toward the deeper, darker part of the valley as though to say, "Rise, the journey is not yet finished." Old Man wiped his tears. With great difficulty, he pulled himself up and pressed on, limping and trembling. A short while later the goat stopped before a large rock that stood like a wall blocking the way ahead. He thought it was over. But the goat turned its head toward a thick cluster of thorny bushes growing against the rock and began pushing at them with its horns. Old Man helped with his walking stick. One by one the bushes were cleared away, and when the largest clump was finally moved, his feet stopped where they stood. In the lower face of the mountain there was a narrow opening, so narrow that a man could only enter by crawling. But from within that opening came a current of cool and fresh air, the kind of air that flows from somewhere open and pure. The goat looked at Old Man. Old Man looked at the goat. His heart was pounding heavily. He was afraid. Who knew what lay within? There could be a wild animal, there could be danger. Yet there was something in that air that was drawing him forward. He took the name of God and bent down to his knees, then crawled on his belly into the narrow opening. The first few steps were in complete darkness. His heart sank. But slowly the passage widened, and ahead of him a faint light began to appear. He crawled on, moving forward, until he reached a large open space. He raised his head, and what he saw took the breath clean from his body. He was standing at the entrance of a hidden valley, enclosed on all sides by towering mountains, as though it were a world entirely separate from the one he knew. The walls of the valley were threaded with thick veins of gold that sliced through the black rock and shone like rivers of frozen light. Across the ground lay pieces of gold of all shapes and sizes, scattered as though handfuls had been thrown down from the heavens above. In the pale light that filtered through, everything gleamed and glowed with gold. His legs gave way beneath him. He fell involuntarily into prostration, and wept until his shoulders shook. But these were not tears of sorrow. These were tears of gratitude. He wept, and at the same time gave thanks to God from the very depths of his heart. In that moment, he understood with complete certainty that this blind goat was no ordinary creature. It was a means set by God, arriving as the answer to a lifetime of pain and tears. He rose from his prostration and began to work without wasting a single moment, for time was short, and the night was advancing. He took out the old cloth sacks he carried for gathering firewood and began to collect the pieces of gold from the ground. His hands were trembling, not from greed, but from the awe of receiving so great a gift from his Lord. He filled both sacks and left the rest behind, in the certain belief that the provision God has written for a person will always remain safe. The weight was immense, heavier than any bundle of firewood he had ever carried. But he put every last ounce of his strength into dragging the sacks through the passage and out the other side. The blind goat was waiting exactly where he had been left, not having moved, not having wandered. He stood steady and still, watching the entrance of the cave with a calm gaze, as though he knew everything. He tied the sacks of gold onto the goat's back, and covered them with dry grass and branches so that if anyone passed by on the road, the truth of what lay beneath would remain hidden. The journey back began in the darkness of night. He walked beside his goat, and the goat led him safely along the path. The same thorns, the same stones, the same narrow track. Yet this time he felt neither the pain in his foot nor the bite of the cold. There was a warmth of faith burning in his chest, and a deep and quiet peace in his heart. The following morning old man came to the same market. The same torn clothes, the same weathered face. At first no one paid him any attention. But when he reached the center of the market, where the traders from the day before were seated, the voices began again. One let out a mocking laugh. "Look, the one who bought a walking corpse has returned." Another called out, "What is it, old man? Did you gather some sticks to sell us?" He gave no answer. He stopped in the very middle of the market and looked at those men with a gaze that carried no hatred, only a quiet and unshakable dignity. At that very moment, the goat gave a small shake to brush away a fly. The worn and weakened sack could not bear the weight of the heavy metal within it, and its edge tore open. A large pure nugget of gold came rolling out, and came to rest right at the feet of the merchant, who had laughed the loudest the day before. Then another. Then another. A small heap of gold formed on the ground and began to catch the morning light and gleam. A terrible silence fell over the entire market. Everyone stood frozen. The merchant's eyes went wide and stayed that way. He stared at the gold, then at old man, then at the goat, then at the gold again. No one could make sense of what was happening before their eyes. He calmly bent down, picked up one piece of gold and placed it on the merchant's table. In a voice loud enough for all to hear, he said, "I wish to purchase your shop, and along with it the respect that you give only in exchange for money." That moment was written into the history of that market forever. In a single instant that old man, who had been mocked and laughed at by all, became the wealthiest and most respected man in the entire village. But a heart that has tasted hardship and deprivation cannot be entered by arrogance. He did not spend his wealth upon himself. He had wells dug for the poor of the village. He arranged food for widows and orphan children. He built a place of rest for travelers passing through. And for the blind goat, he built the finest shelter in the village, in honor of the means through which God had sent him his deliverance. His name became a prayer on every tongue. As for the merchants who had mocked him, they could not sleep that night for envy. They gathered in secret and decided that they too would go down that same path and return with even more gold. The next day, they set out with fresh strong horses and large empty sacks. But the ground that had grown soft beneath the hooves of that blessed blind goat grew hard beneath their horses. They wandered for hours. That rocky opening in the mountainside never revealed itself to them. Snakes blocked their path. The stony ground broke the legs of their horses. The darkness erased the trails before them. Several days later they returned to the village, broken and exhausted and ashamed. Empty-handed, sick in body and defeated in spirit. And he spent the rest of his life saying the same words to all who asked him the secret of his wealth. He would smile and say, God sometimes hides his provision in the weakest and most broken of things. And he gives the keys of salvation to those whom we mock and laugh at. Never consider any blessing too small, no matter how broken it may appear to be. The lesson this story leaves us with is this: the provision of God does not always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it is hidden in a sick animal, sometimes behind a closed door, sometimes within a hardship that is in truth a blessing in disguise. We often decide for ourselves what form our provision should take, and when God sends it by another way, we turn it away. He did what is the most difficult thing of all. He placed his trust in something that appeared worthless and left his matter in the hands of God. So from this day forward, never consider any blessing too small, for perhaps that very thing is the greatest turning point your life will ever know. How did you find this story? Do share your thoughts in the comments below. And if there has ever been a moment in your own life when something small became a great blessing, share that with us as well. Subscribe to our channel, and until the next story, thank you.